Here's your water if you want. Water. Welcome to the MSC Spotlight on Belarus. As you all have noticed, the theme of US-Europe relations hovers very prominently over this MSC. So I think it's very important that we have the time, that we take the time to also look at what that means for Belarus. My name is Gwendolyn Sasse. I'm the director of the Center for East European and International Studies in Berlin. The abbreviation is CEUS. I have the honor of moderating this discussion here today. Let me briefly introduce the three panelists. They don't really need an introduction, so I will be very brief. Next to me is Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya. She is the head of the United Transitional Cabinet of Belarus, the leader of the opposition in exile, although I think you don't really like that description, but I, as a shorthand now, use it anyway. Next to her is Kęstutis Budrys, the Lithuanian foreign minister, and to my far end, on my left, is Senator Welch. Welcome to you as well. You are a member of the Senate Committee on Agriculture, Nutrition and Forestry, but maybe even more relevant for this discussion, you've also supported the Free Belarus caucus for a long time. You've personally been engaged in particular support also for the release of the political prisoners in Belarus. So we have a good round to discuss this. I should have, of course, highlighted, but everybody knows that in the room, that Lithuania was the country most quickly and most energetically supporting Belarus and the opposition. Also many Belarusians who had to flee after the mass protest in 2020. So, Ms. Tsikhanouskaya, if I can start with you. A lot has happened in, US politics, but also in transatlantic relations over the last year. And I'm wondering what also the US more selective engagement with Belarus, which on the one hand has brought about several rounds of releases of political prisoners, among them your husband. But on the other hand, this comes also at a certain price. The price is the lifting of sanctions. What does that mean for you, for your organization? What's your perception on what is happening? Where do you see Belarus and the opposition in this?
Thank you, first of all, to Munich Security Conference. That's the first time for its history there is a spotlight on Belarus. It seems to me that more and more countries understand strategic importance in new security architecture of our region. So long Belarus was like gray zone and shadow, and now it's evident that independent and free Belarus is in the interest of free Europe. So first of all, of course, we have been advocating and fighting for freedom of Belarusian political prisoners for 5 years already. And we are so grateful to the diplomatic efforts of President Trump administration, to John Cole personally, Chris Smith, Andy Baker for their personal involvement in this process. And of course, we encourage American administration to continue this track, because about 300 people have been released already, but still at least 1,000 behind the bars, and this repressive machine continuing to work, because instead of 10 released people, twice more are detained. And also one very important aspect is that people are not really released, they are forcefully deported out of the country. People don't have rights either to stay in Belarus or leave the country, and new criminal cases again are opened against those who are already released. So it's really a mess. But nevertheless, nevertheless, people's lives, safer people's lives is our priority, and we're in constant communication with the State Department and the White House about further steps. Very important here to underline that all these releases wouldn't be possible without a strong and principled position of European Union. It's Lukashenko releases people not because he suddenly became humane, but all those sanction policy, all those pressure politics of isolation and non-recognition is working at the moment. And I'm so grateful to our biggest allies like Lithuania, Poland, and other countries who all these years, put pressure on the regime and supported Belarusians. So what's important to underline here is that humanitarian track doesn't equal to normalization of the situation or recognition or legitimization of Lukashenko. We have to divide these tracks, because while Lukashenko is selling people, there are no changes in the country. He's the same illegal person who seized the power, so he's continuing repressions in the country. He commits transnational repressions. So our task, of course, first of all, to release people, but the second is to release our country. So we have formula: American sanctions to save lives, European sanctions to save the country.
Mm-hmm. If I can just ask also, because what's really important for your strategy, it seems, is really a united West, and it's also a very strong focus on democracy, on human rights. Do you see that as possible with the current US administration?
Of course, transatlantic unity is extremely important for such nations who are fighting against dictatorship, but we understand that new politicians are coming, and President Trump's approach is more transactional. But I'm so proud of European Union that are keeping strong, almost united, and I don't see any appetite at the moment for changing the policy towards Belarus, because I think in Europe there is more understanding that Belarusian case, it's not only about political disaster or humanitarian catastrophe in Belarus, but it's also about security. And Europe is very interested in an independent Belarus that is a reliable partner to Europe, but also to Ukraine. And everybody in Europe understands that while Lukashenko is there, that it will be a constant threat to the security of European Union borders, because we already see how regime is terrorizing Lithuania, for example, with these meteor balloons that interrupts airspace, or sending migrants to the borders, or keeping Lithuanian trucks on Belarusian territory, or continuing, to accumulate Russian presence, military presence in Belarus, just for possible escalation against Ukraine or against Europe. So it's, I have to repeat, strategic importance of democratic Belarus for regional security.
Thank you. Let me go to you next, Senator Welch. Could you please explain to us the new approach of the US administration, the more selective engagement with Lukashenko? Why now, and what's the strategy? What's the short-term and maybe more long-term implications of this?
I'm not sure there is a really articulated strategy rather than a preference to be involved as opposed to not involved. I mean, the humanitarian situation and the political prisoners is really catastrophic for the families involved, and it really reflects an oppressive government in Belarus. And I think the president clearly wants to have the capacity to have a relationship, and the mechanism by which I think he engaged was to take up the cause of the human rights situation for many people who are held. But also, it has to be seen in the context of where the United States is with respect to supporting Ukraine. And that is one where the Belarus with Lukashenko is very much facilitating what Putin is doing. And to the extent that I think the administration feels that they can have some engagement, it creates the possibility of some avenues of influence through Belarus. Whether that'll work remains to be seen. But Belarus is in this situation where there is this long-term dictatorial government. It uses political prisoners as a means of severe control. People are put in prison, and now there is the gestures of release of prisoners, but other people are picked up. So what has really changed? It is why I think the sanctions should absolutely continue, but it puts it also in the context of what are we doing in our effort to stand up for Ukraine and be stronger with Europe, and that's a very significant debate that continues within the administration and Congress, with the president having one point of view and many of us in Congress wanting a much stronger assertion of alliance with Europe to support our efforts for Ukraine's independence. Thank you.
If I can just pick up what you already used the word normalization, and the U.S. Special Envoy John Cole used that term, that this is part of the U.S.'s new engagement with Lukashenko, part of a normalization. How do you see that, and what are the risks of that? Because we've mentioned it briefly only. The U.S. has lifted sanctions. You've said the EU sanctions are more comprehensive and maybe stronger, maybe, I heard it like that, maybe more important. But nevertheless, lifting sanctions on potash, that is also sending a strong signal to Lukashenko, who needs financial lifelines, who wants to increase his room for maneuver vis-à-vis the West. Could you explain that a little bit more, how you position yourselves to that, also this claim to normalization?
Well, this, of course, is an administration decision, all right? And I think the president has a preference, and this is me speculating, because this is an exclusive executive function. It's not like we're debating this in Congress. But the president likes to have a direct relationship with other leaders. The ability to have influence to release political prisoners, I think, is obviously advantageous, most importantly for the people who are in prison, but also for dialogue. But third, where the question is can you trust Lukashenko? What is the outcome that we're going to have by engaging with him when he's deeply embedded in what Putin is doing? I think that's the fundamental question. For me, I have an enormous amount of skepticism that absent sanctions and a clarity that we see ourselves as on the side of Ukraine and human rights, we're not going to get much out of a long-term engagement with Lukashenko. So I think when it comes to the fundamental question here about what's going on with Putin in Ukraine, Lukashenko is not going to ultimately be on our side.
Minister Budrys, if I can turn to you, what's the view from Lithuania, the Lithuanian government's position? What risks and opportunities do you see in this shift in U.S. policy towards Belarus?
We know Belarus for decades as being the neighbors, and I work for security, within the security community for almost 25 years, and Belarus was always one of the sources of threats to our country. Together with Russia, through really deep integration what concerns military regional group, through integration of their policies on some of the tools that they use within the hybrid warfare, through integration of their operations of the intelligence services against neighbors, especially against the opposition elsewhere. So we have no naivete what concerns Belarus. What we learned from all these years, seeing the cycles up and downs in the relations between Belarus and the West, because it was always, same pattern. So they organize elections. It's not elections. It's just a rigged, ceremony to pretend that there is democracy. There are immediate human rights violations and brutal actions against the opposition. Then we go with the sanctions as the West collectively. Then after some of the years, there is some charm offensive from Lukashenko. We normalize the relations, and then another elections, and then it goes down. So you can draw these lines during the last 20 years. So one can ask, so what is different this time? We just had the 2020 rigged elections with all the consequences for the people that were just kicked out from the country, deported. That is the crime in itself, what they did. And now we have the attempt to show that, oh, we can normalize, there is a window, and we can work it out together. One of the things, just also to remind you what happened during those cycles, and especially when there was the bigger warmth towards the West, Lukashenko immediately sold it out to Putin and got something from Russia. That was not only about the West, that was about Belarusian balancing, sort of. And we were buying this game and buying this play because we really want to believe that there can be a difference, geopolitical difference, that Belarus can be, more sovereign. But during this decade, they didn't become more sovereign. They lost more and more areas where they are in control, but not Russia. And in this cycle, and it is our also message to our American friends, maybe there is an opportunity for U.S. administration to break it finally, right? With strong hand and with strong control of the process. Because what we are seeing right now is that Lukashenko feels that he's less isolated already, that he can maneuver easily. He immediately started another hybrid attack against Lithuania. There was these smuggling balloons interrupting in our airspace. We have to shut down our international airport because of that. They increased this support to Russia in aggression against Ukraine. They are doing this in recent months with additional technical support and also with the supplies. So he's exploiting this situation in absolutely opposite direction that we would expect. We would think that normalization means like you are less involved into the crimes that are committed against Ukraine. You are less rough on the political opposition that is inside the country. No, even with what concerns political opposition, the numbers, they're getting back. So the total calculus that Vesna is doing, the NGO, the major responsible for reviewing the situation, so they remain at that same level. I'm not saying that it failed. I'm saying that we need a strong hand. We, meaning we with our assistance, United States, needs a strong hand and control the process, because it's not the easy negotiation. We support the final goal that is in front of these diplomatic efforts, to get all the political prisoners released and stop this vicious cycle, this returns and returns. We cannot give him currency with the humans that he is selling around, some for the sanctions, some for some invitations, and something else. It won't provide more security. It will decrease our security as it is happening right now. So to summarize, we've seen it previously. Not once. I am absolutely skeptical if someone else would do it. I have believed that if someone can do this, that's the United States. But we need all these strong sticks and not only carrots to progress forward. What else I would, what I would see as the positive, probably, part of it, that finally we are transforming the issue of Belarus into something more geopolitical within this discussion, because it was for too long related to the human rights only, and we were missing the chance to see the potential actor that is just on our front line and in our neighborhood. That was the constant source of the threats, that's true. That was the playground for Russians, yes. For aggression against Ukraine, yes. But whether there is a potential sovereign actor there, and what would be the role of it in Europe. We were missing this discussion. And I think that was the problem of our slow reaction back in 2020. I remember then being part of the intelligence community, and I remember the questions that I received then that were all about Russia, but none about Belarus. So what will happen with Belarus? Everyone was concerned whether Russia will intervene and whether Russian tanks will go into Minsk. So this is a reflection of our strategic thinking. In our picture, we are missing Belarus. So we have to put it back. And if these efforts of United States facilitate this process, okay, let's talk. What will be after the peace in Ukraine? What role will be of Belarus? But before we do it, we cannot ignore and we cannot forget accountability. Accountability for Belarusian, for regimes' crime against their own citizen. Deportation is the crime. Same with the assistance for aggression against Ukraine, land, airspace that was provided for Russia for the attack. Also indoctrination of abducted children from Ukraine. They were brought to some of the camps that were in Belarus. Accountability must be left high, and we cannot just provide the maneuver, the space for maneuver, and say that okay, it's forgiven. Because if we will do this mistake, they will return again and again and again, as we already seen.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you are right to say that geopolitics puts more of a focus again on Belarus, but you seem to be arguing a bit in two different directions. I mean, what do you think personally of the notion that by engaging more directly with Lukashenko, perhaps Belarus becomes more of a sovereign actor again, and therefore leaves the Russia orbit a little bit? But you also said what we've seen for so long that never really happens. So where do you see sort of the way forward? What does it mean geopolitically? A sovereign actor, but that it requires some sort of engagement, and at the same time we don't really trust that it will leave Russia's orbit.
Precondition to have the arrangements with Lukashenko is for him to show that he has this sovereignty in his hand, first of all. I'm not even judging the very regime, but if he is the sovereign actor, show the sovereignty. The whole territory can be used by Russians in the way that they want. We can have different explanations what happened on February 2022 when the full-scale invasion started, what were the decision of Belarus, but my conclusion is that they were not in the control of it. Same with the deployment of tactical nuclear weapon. In these 4 years, there is more Russia within Belarus. With the tactical nuclear weapons, it changes the strategic picture in the region, and it plays the role as the platform for Russia, and it's not like a sovereign country. Same with the deployment of medium-range missiles system, Oreshnik, there. And from the one hand, we see more and more anchors in Belarus, and then from the other angle, I can suppose that some of these would be the bargaining chips for Russia to negotiate with the United States or with America about the overall security arrangement and the force deployment in Europe. And this is really scary. So returning to your question, Lukashenko has to prove that he owns that territory and the country. To show that, and how to show it, get rid of Russians from your territory. First of all, stop assistance to Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. That is the proof that okay, at least you can pretend that you control something.
Mm-hmm. Are there discussions in your government that partially EU sanctions could be or should be lifted?
No, we will have the answer next week. I'm really optimistic that there will be the rollover of sanctions, EU sanctions, against Belarus for another 12 months. And that is the good thing to do, because we have to remember the reasons why were they imposed, first of all. That is the human rights violation in 2020. In 2021, when they hijacked the airplane flying to Vilnius and took one of the opposition representatives from the plane. Then again in 22 with the assistance to Russia. And now, additionally, we propose, and it's agreed, to expand the sanction regime against Belarus, including the hybrid activities against the EU. So we have plenty of reasons to keep the sanctions. I cannot imagine how we can review it without Lukashenko fundamentally changing the behavior and being brought to accountability. So my answer is no. And the next week we will, I think, postpone this discussion for another year, because it will be just prolonged.
Mm-hmm. Ms. Yuhanowskaya, how optimistic are you that the EU consensus on sanctions will hold?
Look, I'm of course rather optimistic because, as I said before, I don't see any efforts of European Union precisely, to change their policy. And of course, Lithuania, of course, has leading position in regarding Belarus, and many rely on Lithuania's position. I'm so grateful to Mr. Budrys and President Nausėda for the principled narratives about, keeping strong against Lukashenko. So, of course, we see how lobbyists of regime intensifying their work, trying to advocate for lifting of sanctions or returning to business as usual. But again, I'm so proud of the European Union that their policy is still based on values, accountability, and rule of law. And of course, again, as I said before, Europe understands importance of Belarus in security dimension, and our fate is evidently connected with the fate of Ukraine. And while assistance to Ukraine is continuous pressure, sanction pressure on Russia, so the same attitude will be to Lukashenko regime. Of course, we have to balance this pressure on the regime with assistance or investment into people, democratic movement, our society, our media, first of all, just to keep us strong as alternative to Russian world, to prepare better offer for Belarusians than the Russians.
Mm-hmm. Sticking with that optimism that you just referred to, what kind of windows are you hoping for? What is the point at which you think there could actually be change within Belarus?
Look, of course, this window of opportunity we are talking about, first of all, connected with the outcome of the war in Ukraine. Because if the democratic world will not help enough to Ukraine for them to win this war, it might freeze situation in Belarus. It will keep status quo for maybe for decades, and we cannot, be very active inside the country or even outside. But when Ukraine wins, it will weaken Russia. Weakened Russia, hence means weakened Lukashenko. So that's why it might be the moment when we can step in, and that's why we have to be strong enough, to at this very moment. Look, in Belarus, this maybe Lukashenko systems might seem monolithic, but it's really like it's rotten system already. People in the system gossiping what will be in after Lukashenko era. We have to be prepared for this as well. Who will be next after Lukashenko? There are no strong figures. How to live with Russia, so on and so forth. So many questions, and Lukashenko feels his fragility. He feels that he didn't manage to ruin democratic forces, ruin our unity, that we are strengthening our our presence, and we're still in contact with the people on the ground. And Lukashenko didn't manage for these 5 years of repressions to change way of thinking of Belarusians. People didn't give up. So our task is to be prepared as institutions and to inspire people not giving up as well. And this is, the biggest tool. So that's why just the best way to help Belarus is to intensify pressure on Russia and intensify assistance to Ukraine.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. We'll open it up in a moment. Maybe a last question to you for the moment. You have recently relocated to Warsaw. Could you tell us a little bit about sort of the structure of the organizational structure of the opposition? Does anything change? What changes? What are the discussions also within different maybe groupings of the opposition?
Actually, from the point of view of work of Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, nothing has changed. We just broadened our presence in Warsaw. Our office is stayed in Vilnius, Lithuania. Half of my team continues to work from Vilnius. Some people will be relocated to Warsaw. There are much bigger civic groups in Poland, more media, and we have to have more presence in Poland. So Lithuania and Poland are the most strategically important countries for Belarus, and that's why this decision was made. But again, nothing has changed from the attitude of Lithuania. Lithuania continues to accept Belarusians who are fleeing repressions. There are so many organizations and media also in Lithuania, but just such a decision was made. Also, of course, we see that new leaders, or leaders have been released from prisons, like my husband, Sergei Tikhanovsky, Masha Kolesnikova, Viktor Babarika, and of course we see also the attempts, these narratives of the regime, how to split us, to divide, to transform us into, a kind of Russian opposition where there are so many groups that are competing to each other. And my task is to keep unity of our democratic forces. We have built alternative institutions of power that work rather effective. So we in constant communication with all people who have been released, with Olесь Belyatsky, our Nobel Peace Prize winner, so on and so forth, just to keep our united narratives. Though of course, tactics might be different.
Mm-hmm. And I have to ask one final question from my end, because this doesn't really get enough attention probably. What is happening and what should happen with Belarusians in terms of their passports? I mean, because there's ultimately quite a significant number of already or potentially stateless Belarusians. Could you give us a quick sort of update on that and what you think needs to be done on that?
So I just want to underline that people who live in exile, though living in free and safe countries, we are going through transnational repressions. The regime of Lukashenko really misuse international institutions that were created to support or protect, but they misused, for example, Interpol or some other organizations. And of course, this change of the law regarding passports, now people who live in exile cannot renew their documents through embassies. They have to return home to Belarus. And of course, about 600,000-700,000 people who fled Belarus since 2020 can return home because they will be immediately detained. And passports are expired, and passports are needed, for legalization in different countries. And of course, when this story started, we worked immediately on national levels and different countries just to try to explain the situation and find solutions how to provide legal documents with expired passports. And the first country, that managed to cope with this was Lithuania. Now Lithuania is given a foreign passport of foreigner that help Belarusians, to travel. Poland, then it was Denmark, it was Norway, I suppose. Yes, recently. Spain also changed the regulations. So, of course, we just trying to solve the problems nationally, but we also developed our own systemic solution to this question. We have developed our own passport of free Belarus. Of course, it's a non-orthodox approach because nobody has done this in the history, but look, we have solution, and we are trying to encourage our democratic allies to make these non-conventional decisions. We encourage them to legitimize this passport, to recognize this passport as a valid document, maybe not as passport, but as additional verification document, for example. And we are continuing to work on these projects, rather difficult, but maybe while seeing that no regime is not changing their behavior regarding transnational repression, so maybe we will promote these projects, more thoroughly. And of course, I encourage democratic countries to be bolder in such circumstances, and just if you see that regime misbehaves, to be decisive enough to accept new non-orthodox solutions.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Up to this point, let's open it up. Let's collect a few questions. I think there are mics going around. Let's start here. Briefly introduce yourself.
Yeah, John Benjamin. I run Free Speech Union International in London. Just a very short question. What's your reaction to the inclusion of Lukashenko in the Board of Peace?
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's add a few questions to that, or comments. Yes, here at the front.
Anna Libakova, Atlantic Council. Thank you so much. I'd like to follow up on the point of Minister Budrys regarding the how we miss Belarus in our picture. So what should happen positively for your movement, Svetlana, after the peace agreement regarding Ukraine? How this can help and how it can strengthen your movement? And that's also the question to the whole panel. What is the outcome of the peace talks that would help Belarus?
Mm-hmm. Okay, and we had one additional question or comment if there is one. Otherwise, there's quite a lot to discuss already, so you can still prepare your questions. Maybe Senator Welch, let's turn it to you, the Board of Peace, and actual ways towards peace in Ukraine.
The Board of Peace is a concept. It's not a reality. And the President has been soliciting membership, and I have no confidence that the fact that Belarus accepted is going to result in a real resolution of what's happening in Gaza. So I think that's an indication of the payback of engagement from the White House to Belarus. Belarus will, I think the down payment on that is what, $1 billion? So good for Belarus, good for President Trump, but I don't think necessarily gives me much more confidence that this will result in good things for Gaza. And your question was on? So how to make sure that Belarus is, the democratic Belarus, is at the table and not on the menu, to paraphrase Kami's the pro-democratic aspirations of Belarusians are kind of included in potential outcome of the war against Ukraine, so that Belarus is not against Putin. Well, it actually deferred to my fellow panelists on this, but it's not. I don't see how it's organically connected to what that discussion is. I mean, Belarus is got an oppressive government. It's not planning on going anywhere. It wants to be able to leverage positive relationships with the Trump administration, as we've seen with it signing up to be on the Board of Peace. But it is providing a lot of dual-use equipment that goes into Russia to assist in its aggression on Ukraine. So I don't see this as being particularly helpful there.
Yeah, I just want, to reply, what the concern of Belarusian people is that in the process of peace negotiations, if Belarus dimension is not included into these talks, Belarus can organically be given as cancellation prize to Putin. Because, it's Lukashenko's will. But we have to include people's desire about Belarus. We want our strategic goal is to return to our European roots, to return to European family of countries, and this desire should be included into these peace negotiations. So that's why Belarus is not the object, to give this side or give that side, but subject, and we have to influence, somehow this peace dialogue about Ukraine, because again, returning to my basis thesis that without free democratic Belarus, there will be constant threat to Ukraine as well, and this peace deal might be not peace deal at all, but a short break for Russia to regroup, to intensify their presence in Belarus and to restart the war again against Ukraine or maybe against the European Union. And President Zelensky, whom I recently met for the first time, is really concerned that from the territory of Belarus, this increasing threat to security of Ukraine, first of all.
Do you want to add something?
From our side, answering about inclusion of Belarus to the Board of Peace, that was, I would say, unfortunate proposal. That we have the leader that we, Lithuania, refer to International Criminal Court for the crimes against human rights because of the deportation of the people. As the country, we also refer them to International Court of Justice for instrumentalized migration against us, and seeing him regime in any organization or formation that has the word peace in it, it really complicates our considerations of being also part of it. What concerns the Belarus being one of the opposition of the current regime being part of the negotiation process, it is a really difficult one. I do not see that Belarus can be an actor or some country with the say there. I see them as the backyard for garage sale for Russians. That they would say that, okay, we can move this out if you move something else out to the United States, and it's a very bad situation where where the Belarus is right now. I wouldn't be investing so much into thinking how to change the status of theirs if they are not doing, meaning even the regime, they're not showing even the little independence in what's in their hand. I would invest for this time, and there will be the opportunity for the regime change. As returning to the lessons from 2020 and then following what Svetlana was saying already, preparing the administrative capacities, the people, opposition that would fulfill all the governmental structures, also have this connection with the society and in Belarus, and make it as smooth as stable. And then also that's a big question for us, how to support all this process during this window of opportunity. Now we know what to do. We have to support the opposition in exile. We have to support the organization financially in all the ways, but we also have to be prepared for that moment. And have the full picture. I have also different visions and real optimistic ones. I want to have the neighbor where I can travel with my family that would be stable, friendly, and no threats at the border. I really wish, and I wish to see it in my lifetime.
Mm-hmm. Let's open it up again. Yes, please.
My question is to President Tikhanovskaya.
Introduce yourself, briefly.
Sergey Pelesa, Deputy Editor-in-Chief of Belsat TV. My question is to President Tikhanovskaya. Can you tell more about your relations with Vladimir Zelensky? Do you think this talk in Vilnius and his invitation to you to visit Kyiv for the first time, is it really historical turn of the Ukrainian policy? What is the reason of this change? Thank you.
Of course, it was an important meeting because since the beginning of the war, Belarus became country co-aggressor. Belarusians, in the majority, are on the side of Ukrainians. We always, as much as we could, supported Ukraine. We cannot give billions, we cannot give military equipment to Ukraine, but we can show our solidarity on political arena, on international arena. I always promoting more assistance to Ukraine, that narratives that Ukraine must win. Our military volunteers fighting in Ukraine, defending this wonderful country, and defending Belarusian partisans that disrupted railways to slow down Russian equipment going to Ukraine. So we try to contribute into victory of Ukraine, but all these years Ukraine was rather cautious in communicating with democratic forces. I think because it was concerned that, again, the second front might be opened, that missiles again will be launched from Belarus. But this meeting and my visit to Kyiv that will follow this meeting is a clear signal of Kyiv that we chose the side, that we are not going to forgive Lukashenko or forget what he has done, or his crimes, that we are choosing free democratic Belarus, and we believe in democratic forces, we believe in unity of Belarusian people, in European aspirations of our citizens. And, this change of the narratives we noticed about a year ago when President Zelensky told that Belarus is part of that eastern borders of Europe, placed to the eastern border of Belarus, that there is lawlessness in the country, and step by step, we started to get reached by Ukrainian representatives of administration. I think it's new stage of our relationship, and I hope that we will manage to work more on Belarusian Ukrainian strategy, how to just bring not only Ukraine but also Belarus to European family of the countries, but also there are so many questions about Belarusians who live in Ukraine, about our veterans, about military volunteers who are fighting. There are so many problems, but of course the first question I will ask when arrive to Kiev will be how else we can help Ukraine to win, because of course we going through difficult times, but on the victory of Ukraine depends fate of Belarus, so that's why we as a nation have to contribute as much as we can in their victory first of all.
We've almost run out of time, but maybe we can sort of ask each of you once very briefly and just give one example or the most important point. How do you think from the US, from Vilnius, and also obviously from your point of view, can the West, can the US, Europe, or your opposition organizations support basically a democratic Belarus best at this point in time?
I think it's very tied up with our really strong support for Ukraine, and that is being tested. And I think that Belarus, our support for Ukraine is a support for democratic aspirations and self-determination. And that principle, the more we recommit ourselves to it, the more helpful I believe that will be for Belarus.
Yeah. I think that we have to continue what we're already doing. That's the precondition. And what I said, financially and politically support opposition organizations. That's first. Second, we have to continue our efforts to keep this case high on the political agenda. It's not easy when there are so many turmoils going around. Also to remember that there is one issue that we also have to pay attention. That's Belarus. And the third thing, I think that we have to also present the alternative for the Belarus that we can jointly produce for Belarusian society. So what would be the alternatives? And it's not only Russia the alternative for the current regime. What it would mean to be a democratic country? What it would mean to be within the community? I'm not only talking about the integration. If you will want to, you will be part of these organizations. But what it is to have the normal relations with the neighbors, and we have to again and again put some efforts into it. I think that we still pay too little attention.
Mm-hmm. And you have the last word. What is most needed, and what do you want to most bring?
So look, first of all, of course, I encourage the world, first of all, divide Belarusian regime and Belarusian people, while punishing the regime, assist people, invest into people, because very often behind, governments, Lukashenko, we lose the most precious of the country. It's people. We are doing our best. We have very limited space, capacity, resources. We really achieved a lot, of course, with the help of our allies. Second, divide Belarus and Russia. We are not one country, and don't look on Russia, just always on Russia. What will Russia say? What will Russia think? There is Belarus, separate nations, and please, listen to us. And the third one, I wish Europe to believe in itself. Because you are strong, you are decisive, and I already say that Europe has done much more than it was waiting from itself, but much less than you are capable of. Thank you.
We leave it there. Thank you very much, and join me in thanking our panelists.